It's difficult to accurately describe what Anarchy Reigns is when it comes to defining the game into any sort of genre. It combines elements of Devil May Cry-like character action games with fighting games, as well as traditional multiplayer shooters, which ends up resulting in a piece of software that, while heavily flawed, is still an incredibly novel and enjoyable experience. Anarchy Reigns is a pseudo-sequel to Platinum's 2009 Wii title Mad World. I say pseudo-sequel because aside from the game's two main protagonists and a handful of minor characters, the games don't exactly have much in common. The single-player campaign consists of walking around a hub world doing side missions until you earn enough points to be able to do a main story mission. The majority of these side missions are boring and repetitive, often consisting of having to kill a certain number of enemies to be able to progress. These types of missions wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, because the fighting in Anarchy Reigns is actually really fun. But instead of allowing you to use that fighting system to its fullest potential, crowds of enemies just surround you, waiting to be sliced in half, while maybe occasionally throwing a punch or two. The main missions, however, which usually consist of some sort of boss fight, are a lot of fun and actually present a genuine challenge, unlike sliding through wave after wave of stationary enemies. The story of Anarchy Reigns centers on Jack Kamen and his hunt to find Maximilian, the man who murdered his daughter. I couldn't really gather too much outside of this basic premise because the story of the game gets pretty ridiculous and convoluted almost instantly. Characters start name-dropping organizations, ranks, and people as if we're just supposed to know them automatically. And the game's English translators must have realized how impossibly difficult the story was going to be to follow, because the translated voice track doesn't seem to take itself seriously at all, which I really appreciated. But despite its complicated nature, story cutscenes are kept to a minimum and are really only there to provide the minimum amount of logical motivation required to progress the player from one fight to the next. And besides, if you're playing this game for the single player, frankly, you're doing it wrong. The game's online multiplayer is where Anarchy Reigns truly shines. The game features a number of modes modeled after your typical multiplayer shooter, things like Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, etc., as well as a few unique modes such as Deathball, a deadly variant of soccer. And where a normal shooter would have the player, well, shooting each other in order to win, Anarchy Reigns replaces guns with Devil May Cry-like combos. Now in the modes with high player counts such as 16-player Battle Royale, things can get pretty crazy and a little difficult to follow. But when playing the game in 4v4 team-based modes, the game works perfectly. The multiplayer maps, which are the large hub worlds from the single player, periodically feature a plethora of goofy environmental hazards in order to herd the players into certain areas of the map. These can range anywhere from a giant runaway 18-wheeler to pickup trucks falling from the sky, or a giant octopus emerging from the ocean, and the list goes on. The icing on the cake for this insane multiplayer experience is the game's impressive soundtrack that booms in the background during these insane bouts. The soundtrack's eclectic mix of aggressive hip-hop, fast-paced trance, and smooth jazz really get your adrenaline pumping during these intense multiplayer matches. So while in conclusion, yes, if you're going to be strictly playing single player, it's pretty likely that you aren't going to have an exceptional experience with Anarchy Reigns. But it's the game's extremely hectic but rarely overwhelming online experience in combination with the catchy soundtrack that elevate this game to something truly special. Overall, I give the game's story a 2, because there isn't much of a story to begin with, and what is there is pretty difficult to follow and generally pretty bad. The presentation 8, because the cutscenes are well produced and the soundtrack is catchy and enjoyable. The gameplay an 8, because the fun DMC-like combo system gives players a good amount of options when fighting. And the design is 6, because the levels are alright and they're reused from single player to multiplayer. The replay value a 9, because the multiplayer modes are original and a blast to play. And overall, I'd give the game a 7 out of 10.